6 participants. So we can start with the summary of day 1. Yes, thank you for the agenda. So on day 1, so we started with the opening remarks of both Director of Emergency from WFP and Director of Emergencies and Resilience from FAO. And then we had a session on impact of conflict and fragility on food security. So we were looking at different food security responses in Ethiopia and Afghanistan. And we were hearing the voices from the cluster coordinators, but from the partners as well. And many things were said, so it's difficult to summarize, but it was highlighted that food insecurity most of the time is not only linked, of course, not only caused by conflict, but it's a diversity of drivers that lead to food insecurity, and especially a mix of conflict and climatic shocks and economic crises, and especially we noted the COVID-19 period that led to a lot of economic crises around this world. Then we had session 2 on anticipatory action and famine prevention, how to act ahead to mitigate food crises. So on this session, just the same, I will not summarize all this time, but just I remember one word that I liked, no regrets activities. So no regrets activities as to define anticipatory action, because we have raised yesterday the difficulty to fund anticipatory action, because we cannot be sure 100% that the forecasted shock will correspond to the reality. So we had some difficulties to finance this anticipatory action. So we really have to say that we have to have no regrets to do this anticipatory action. Another key information was about early warning data collection and analysis, which is really the key step to inform appropriate anticipatory action. Then we had also a session on IPC, a very interesting presentation on IPC, which is, as you know, one of the most used early warning systems in the food security sector. And to finish the day, we had the breakout rooms. So the participants were split in different breakout rooms to allow a more participative exchange among the participants and to really come with concrete and operational recommendations for the cluster and its partners in the field. All right, let's go to day 2. Let's look at the program today. So we have the session 3, which will talk about climate, and session 4 and environment. Just before looking at the details, I'm very pleased to have those 2 topics, climate and environment, mentioned today. These topics, as you know, are in the spotlight in the recent years, and it's very important to have these topics treated during this meeting. And I would like also to highlight that it is one of the section within the Food Security Cluster Strategic Plan 2020-2022, which mention in the cross-cutting section the importance of having environment and climate integrated in our food security response to have greener responses. So looking at, so we'll look at in the details of the speakers for each session, but after those 2 sessions on climate and environment, we will have a session on SAG, so the Strategic Advisory Group, to look at the updates of the SAG and also to welcome new member of the SAG and warmly thank 2 outgoing members. All right. So let's go to please to the session 3 on recurrent climate shocks and food insecurity, acting, adapting, managing. All right. So just before South Sudan is starting, just to tell you that the objective of this session is to reflect on how forecast-based models can contribute to mitigate chronic climatic shocks. And we will have the chance to hear voices from the field from 3 countries, South Sudan, Niger, and Madagascar. So we will start with South Sudan. We have quite a lot of speakers for South Sudan. We will be hearing Alistair Short, the Food Security Cluster Coordinator. Then we will have John Waswa from NRC, Dumezweni Taramba from ADRA, and Thomas Mayuen from Concern. So please, Alistair, if you want to start.
Thank you, Julie. Can you confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. Climate change, community resilience, and adaptation. Can you go to the next slide, please? I'd like to talk about climate change in South Sudan and what it really means. So it's one of the most rapidly warming locations on the planet, increasing by 0.5 degrees Celsius per decade. That's 2.5 times the global average.
Excuse me, Alistair. So sorry. Can you switch on your video if it's possible?
Oh, is it possible?
Normally
okay.
You should be allowed. All the speakers are allowed. Thank you so much. Sorry.
All right. How's that? Very good. So let me tell you a little bit about South Sudan's agriculture, livestock, and natural resource-based livelihoods are being very severely affected by climate change. So climatic events on top of conflict and macroeconomic crises include droughts, weather and vegetation-induced locust infestation, and most dramatically, 3 years of consecutive 60-year high flooding. Next slide, please. The time series maps 2010 to 2021 show the expanding extent of wetlands, plus additionally the 2 locations of Fangak and Bentiu that I'll also talk about in the next few slides. Next slide. Going to Fangak, the photos illustrate inundated farms, some waterlogged for more than 12 months, a flooding phenomena happening also in the dry season. They illustrate restricted access to markets and wild foods and forests, which are essential natural resources for people to stay alive. The loss of livestock through disease and starvation. Where possible, animals are taken to atypical distances to highlands, which results in the loss of milk, the loss of meat, the loss of blood and sales, the loss essentially of the availability and access to foodstuffs for the populations living in the homesteads. Next slide. And this is taking us to Bentiu. And the Bentiu satellite imagery is really quite dramatic. It shows the rapidity of inundation during the month of October. The beginning of October, precious little. And at the moment, our biggest firefight at the moment is in and around Bentiu, the protection of civilian site up in Rubkona County. Next slide, please. Further illustrations again show the extent and magnitude of the floods, and particularly the use of the amphibious sherps. The sherps carrying 1.5 metric tons of food and nutrition supplies. And it's, apart from canoes, the only type of transport that's readily able to move in these flooded waterlogged conditions. And the next slide, please. The graphics here show and illustrate the drivers and causes of flooding. At the top, the graphs on the top show, not in South Sudan, but the above average rainfall in the catchment areas of the River Nile and the River Sobat rivers. The River Nile and River Sobat rivers flowing in and through South Sudan, but it's rainfall outside of South Sudan that's most significant. And if you look at the graphs at the bottom, what you see in those blue bars, because what's happening is the results of record high water levels in Lake Victoria and Lake Kyoga that feed these two rivers. And this explains the reason for this multi-year round waterlogging and floods dramatically reported in the middle of the dry season. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Thomas, and Thomas is going to talk about community flood resilience approach, which is being implemented by Concern Worldwide. Thomas, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, Alistair. I can hear you.
Excellent. Please move to the next slide. Thanks, Thomas. Over to you.
All right. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Thomas. It's Julie speaking. If you can switch on your video. Very nice. Very nice. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to present on community flood resilience that is being implemented by Concern Worldwide in South Sudan. The Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance is a multi-sectoral partnership that is focusing on finding practical ways to help communities in both the developing and developing countries strengthen their resilience to flood risk. We are implementing this project in northern Barghazal state in South Sudan, which is an area that is prone to annual flooding. I think the alliance members are the ones that are listed, 9 of them. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to say much about them, but these are the 9 organizations and institutions that are working together in the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance. The alliance is working in 28 countries across the globe. And if you can look at the map that is below the screen, you can be able to see how the alliance work has spread across the globe. When you look at the below on your right, there is a theory of change, the Alliance Global Theory of Change, that has 3 main pillars. One of the pillars is climate smart flood resilient risk-informed practices, like engaging rural communities that are prone to flooding to participate in practices that are risk-informed. Another pillar is to increase in equitable disbursed funding. And finally, the last one is implementation of laws, plans, policies, and practices. Now, in some contexts, such as South Sudan, where some of these laws don't exist, then the alliance engage the authorities, the partners, in enactment of the laws that will support community flood resilience. Next slide. Yeah, this is part of what we have done so far in South Sudan. When you look at the map, this was conducted in one of the communities where we are implementing the Zurich Resilience Alliance project. This is what we call community scoping work. You know, is an breaking exercise. You know, the first contact with the communities, getting to know their flood history, getting to know the natural environment is actually helping them in mitigating flood risk, which is in one way or another contributing to their vulnerability to floods. So the project actually was piloted in July 2020 in 2 communities. So this year, the project was scaled up to 5 additional communities in each of the counties. That is West and Wool North County. So we have done the community scoping work in all the 12 communities. Now we are at the stage of collecting data, which is actually the backbone of this study or this project. So we are using a tool that is called FRMC, which is a digital platform that is used in collation of data, which is analyzed to inform decision making or to inform the design of community programs that will support the targeted communities into becoming flood resilience. So the FRMC is flood resilience measurement for communities, which is a web-based platform like earlier on. So during community scoping work, all the communities came up with vision statements of where they want to be in the next 5 years in respect to being flood resilience. So this is the work that we have done so far, and we are currently at the stage of data collection, which will take a good number of months in all the 12 communities. Now, that information will be analyzed and will be validated by the communities. And together with the communities, we will be able to design a community project or community interventions that will help those communities into becoming flood resilience. We are going to use like a number of data collection methodologies, which are here, like household surveys, focus group, key informant, and secondary data. So those are self-explanatory. I don't need to say much on that in the interest of time. Final slide. Yeah, so the approach is using the 5 livelihood pentagons or the 5 livelihood capitals. Now, out of the 5 livelihood capitals, there are about 44 sources of resilience, which we use to collect the information. You know, say for example, human capital. Are the communities, do they have knowledge? What is the level of education? Do they have skills or health-wise? And how is that contributing into them being flood resilience? On the right side is a photo was taken in one of the communities where the project is being implemented. This particular community is prone to flash flooding, you know, as a result of heavy rains. So we are targeting communities that are prone to both riverine flooding and also rain flooding. So basically, we are going to we are not going to work in isolation. We are going to work with partners at national level, both humanitarian and government institutions, you know, in order to advocate for funding and also enactment of policies or strategies that support disaster risk reduction at the community level. So in a nutshell, this is what we are doing in South Sudan in terms of community flood resilience. Now, South Sudan actually, like 8 out of 10 states are affected annually by the flooding. So this is going to be a great step towards realization of community flood resilience. So basically, I would like to stop from here. You know, in the interest of time, there is a lot about community flood resilience work that we are doing, but interested partners can be able to contact Concern Worldwide, and we can have bilateral discussion. So thank you so much.
Yeah, hi, Julie. Thanks, Thomas. Hi, Julie. We are here with Aleste. We are actually at the WFP offices where we are presenting. So for the interest of time, I'll jump straight to the next 3-4 slides where we'll be presenting jointly with ATRA. Basically, through WFP and FAO-funded projects, ATRA and NRC have been piloting upland rice production in Twitch and Tonj counties to mitigate against floods. You know, some of the challenges that Alice and my colleagues already pointed up on before. Next slide, please. Okay, NRC and ATRA have been implementing projects, you know, in Warrap State, in Tonj and Twitch counties before, basically supporting farmers on vegetable production, you know, cereal crops and so forth. But because of the floods, you know, the recent year floods, I think the last 2-3 years, there have been floods, so leading to a lot of crop failures. So different efforts have been done, you know, flood control, flood dikes. We've tried, you know, road control, dikes and things like that, but apparently that has not worked. You know, farmers, the community keep on losing their crops because of these floods. As a result of that, through WFP and FAO funds, NRC and ATRA have piloted in the last 1 or 2 years crop diversification, basically looking at some of the crops, you know, that can be able to tolerate either floods or drought. And one of the crops of choice has been rice. You know, NRC also did some sweet potatoes, but I'll be focusing on rice, which has been, of course, a crop of choice because it's been tolerant, when it comes to floods as compared to the traditional vegetables and other crops that have been, grown by the farmers. Next slide, please. Yeah, now this slide just demonstrates, I wish I had some other slides where other crops were not doing so well, but as you can see, you know, from the slide, you know, at least some rice is able to tolerate the flooding and the farmers are able to harvest something at the end of the year. Next slide, please. Okay, for NRC, the piloting started in 2019 with basically 5 veterans with seats from FAO. In 2020-21, we expanded the production, the piloting to about 17 to 20 veterans. For TRR ATRA, this is their first year where they're just piloting, and they started with 1 veteran, basically as a trial and seed multiplication. And they are looking forward, because there's a lot of interest from the farmers, you know, to expand in the coming years. And next slide, please, and I'll leave it to my colleague, Tumi.
Next slide, Julie. Thank you very much. We really have no results at the moment in terms of how crop food security will be tangled, but looking at anticipated outputs and effects, what we need to do for 2022 is that since farmers have a lot of enthusiasm, we expand the area under cultivation for rice, mainly because looking at the baseline that we had for sorghum, there was no harvest at all under the waterlogged conditions. And rice, because it has proved that it can adapt in waterlogged environments. That gives us an opportunity to then have communities producing for food security. So we are hoping that if communities can produce adequate rice, they will be able to reduce on the sale of livestock for coping mechanisms. And also maybe they can produce enough for their own needs and a surplus maybe to sell. So hoping that this happens, we are also looking at, in terms of the coming years, a lot of research and learning, especially in terms of gross margin analysis of the crop versus other crops, and also doing other learnings. How feasible is it for our communities to produce rice? And if they can, what varieties are good for the smallholder farmers? Let's go to the next slide, please. And on this slide, we are just showing farmers after they've harvested their rice. And this was in Twitch. So I'll hand over to Alistair for the last slide.
Finally, some challenges and recommendations. If you can shift the slides, please. The main challenges: 3 consecutive years of atypical 50 to 60-year floods, impoverished population, overall PIN of 8.3 million, 60% of the population, collapsed infrastructure, economy and livelihoods, and insufficient funding for disaster risk reduction. Recommendations around advocacy with resource, humanitarian and development partners joined. The promotion of DRR and adaptation pilots for scaling up, expanding existing dike rehabilitation, and finally, and most importantly, in South Sudan, peace, rule of law, and unity. 3 things that are sadly missing in our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very dynamic and complete cluster team presentation of South Sudan. Now I will give the floor to Niger speakers. So we will have Uwe Guluma, FSL Senior Officer from IFRC, and also Dr. Megan Bailey, Social Protection and Health Manager from the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, talking about forecast-based financing, how to mitigate the drought impact in Niger. Please, if you have a good connection, do not hesitate to switch on your video.
Thank you, Julie. Do you see me well?
Yes, and hear you well as well.
Okay, thanks for introducing Megan and me, and hello to everyone. So let's go to the next slide, please, Julie. So let me quickly run you through the content of our presentation. For those of you who are not familiar with forecast-based action as defined by the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, Megan will provide a brief explanation of the difference between a classic response and forecast-based actions. We'll then quickly present the climate and food security context of Niger. And then we'll show you a short video describing an early action protocol for mitigating drought impacts, and it's being piloted, but not yet triggered in southern Niger by the Niger Red Cross and the French Red Cross. And then Megan will end with challenges and key lessons learned. So the next slide, please, Julie, and over to you, Megan.
Wonderful, thanks so much, Uwe. I think you've had a presentation yesterday that's looking at anticipatory action, so this might be a bit of a refresher. Forecast-based financing or forecast-based action, anticipatory action, these are all synonyms that mean that the same concept, which is really trying to identify an early window of opportunity pre-hazard or pre the peak impacts of those hazards, in the case of slow onset hazards, which is often the case. If you look at the 2 graphics that we have sort of the business as usual case, which is we sometimes have an early warning systems that exist in governments. Then it's followed by the hazard, followed by impacts, so populations that are in need, followed by a response. And so what we're trying to promote is this concept of initiating humanitarian action, and in particular, releasing the finances for that, which is why it's sometimes called forecast-based financing, or that was the original term, as we were really trying to highlight that it was in typical times, it was the financing of those early actions that was really the bottleneck, preventing humanitarian and government actors from initiating early action before the disaster based on a forecast. So what anticipatory action or forecast-based financing is essentially opening up this new window of opportunity, that we have the warning. That warning is followed by actions of some kind, of various kinds, usually followed by the hazard if the forecast was indicating correctly, and then followed by ideally reduced impacts, and in an ideal scenario, reduced overall humanitarian spending or reduced response afterwards. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be talking about our program for drought, or for low seasonal rainfall within Niger. We also have an operational flood forecast-based financing program that's already triggered once, but I'll be talking about just the one for drought, as the drought program is more oriented towards food security needs. Because of the complex nature of Niger, with more limited capacity of our national society, as well as conflict, we have decided to start out in one area, which is the area of Zander. And we are already starting this year expanding out to work in other areas, but what I'm talking about today is our program that is currently operational in Zander. I'm showing you this slide, which is a little bit complicated, but if this is rainfall going back from the 1980s, and the brown years are below rainfall, average rainfall, and the green years above the line are above average rainfall. On the top left is national, so all these are all the amalgamated rainfall information, and all the others are the regions, so including our case study region Zander, which is in the bottom category. If you look at the national level, you can see very clearly we have this is rainfall going back. Asha, would you mind muting yourself? Thank you. From the 1980s. We have a very clear trend towards greater wetness. So a movement away from the dry years that were really characteristic of the 80s and 90s that had these really horrific food security implications. If you look at the different regions, you can see a more varied picture. So there are some drier years in the different regions, but overall we don't see in recent decades the really severe dry years that we've seen in the 80s and early 90s in Niger and across Sahel. So I share this because it's important to make sure that we're developing programs that are in line with current risk and levels of risk, rather than risk of the past. And so we're certainly not, our program is oriented towards the kinds of drought events that we experience now, as opposed to the kinds of drought events that have been more typical in the 80s and early 90s. And this change is not because of global climate change, but rather the Sahel, like other regions in the world, experiences a bit of a pendulum swing, so a decadal variation. So we had a period of very wet years in the 80s and 90s, and we have since then moved into a couple of decades of wetter years, or sorry, did I say dry years in the 80s and 90s. We've moved into a period of wetter years, and it's unclear, especially since we have the role of climate change, of whether this period of wetness will persist or whether we will swing back into a period of dryness. But at the moment we're in a period of relative wetness, and our drought program is tailored towards this level of risk that we currently experience. Next slide, please. So you are all food security specialists and I am not. I'm a climate person, so what I'm saying to you is probably very, very simple to you, but what I'm showing you is years of rainfall from 2005 to 2018. I need to update it for the last couple of years, but the relationship is showing is the same. So we do see some dry years in Niger, 2009, 2013, and 2014. What I've plotted on here is food security trends. So the average is red, Then we've got severe, moderate, and at risk being the green, so lowest level of food insecurity. And you can just, if you eyeball it, you can see there is a relationship with rainfall, but it's not the only thing going on. And you as food security specialists know this very, very well. There's a lot that's driving food insecurity in the Sahel. And it's important that we tailor our early warning systems to keep this in mind, that it is that rainfall has a relative role in this, but it is not the only driver, and it may not even be the most important driver of food insecurity. And in our analysis, we tried to create that link about, the magnitude of low rainfall that creates food security implications, and we actually couldn't establish that relationship very clearly because there's so much movement that happens independently of rainfall. Although we were able to very clearly show that below average rainfall yields reduces yield, and rainfall explains about 40% of deviation of yield within Niger. So we know that this is having an effect. Rainfall is having an effect on yield. The extent to which that casts on and has very clear implications for standard food security metrics, it's much less clear. Next slide. This is just a map of Niger showing us our area of Zander that we're working in.
Yeah, this is me now.
Sorry, I'll stop talking.
It's okay. Okay. As mentioned earlier, the Drought Early Action Protocol is being piloted by the Niger Red Cross and French Red Cross in the agro-pastoral belt circled in blue in the region of Zinder. And this zone was selected based on the drought hazard, recurring periods of food and nutrition insecurity, and because insecurity limits where the pilot program can currently operate. The zone is characterized by primarily rain-fed cereal crop production, sorghum and millet, and livestock production, as well as petty trade. And in addition to structural deficiencies in the agricultural sectors, including food security and livelihood enhancing services and infrastructure, extreme and erratic rainfall, dry spells, and other hazards are an enduring challenge for agriculture. Markets are also highly vulnerable to even minor shocks within the country and the region. And in this area, poverty is chronic, with 50% of households that are poor, very poor, and highly dependent on seasonal labor demand related to cereal production. So just to give you a quick food security profile of the zone. Next slide, please, Julie. Okay, we're going to play this video, which was made for the general public, but nicely describes, I think, forecast-based action. And just to know that the Drought Early Action Protocols was developed in close collaboration with national and decentralized authorities, to which the Niger Red Cross has an auxiliary role, which is an advantage, as well as UN agencies, including WFP and FAO, and international and national NGOs. So yeah, if you could play it.
Since 2019, the French Red Cross has been experimenting with forecast-based actions in Niger as part of a project aiming to strengthen community resilience in the Zander region, which is affected by recurring periods of food and nutritional insecurity. Just like its neighboring countries in the Sahel region, Niger is strongly impacted by many risks, especially droughts, which have a direct impact on the population's livelihood and their food and nutritional security. After an in-depth study of the drought risk in the country over the past 20 years, the region of Zander was selected because of the community vulnerability, a mainly agro-pastoral population, to this risk. There is only one rainy season in Niger, generally from June to September, and therefore only one cereal harvest, the main food source of the population, from September to October. In the event of a good rainy season, the harvests allow the population to cover their cereal needs until the following rainy season. On the other hand, in the event of a bad rainy season, the harvests are below average and do not meet the necessary quantities. This leads to an exhaustion of food reserves as early as February or March of the following year instead of June or July normally, leading to a period of 4 to 5 months of food and nutritional deficiency. Thus, forecast-based actions aim to 1. Limit the impact of a bad rainy season and therefore poor harvest, and 2. To anticipate the potential food and nutritional crisis that will result as soon as the following month of February. What forecasting systems, triggers, thresholds, indicators, and early actions do we use? In the case of Zander, we will have 2 trigger thresholds and 2 sets of early actions to put in place to anticipate the impact of a bad rainy season and potential bad harvests. We will use one main source of the April weather forecast provided by the European Centre for Weather Forecasts, and the trigger threshold is a rainfall announced as lower than normal. If this threshold is reached as early as April, early actions will be implemented with distribution of seeds adapted to drought of short cycle, which will allow the population, despite the bad rainy season announced, to have a minimum yield from their crops. To anticipate the food crisis the following year, we will use 2 main sources of information. The rate of food insecurity report for the month of November, provided by the harmonized framework with a trigger threshold being phase 3 out of 5 of IPC, which is a crisis phase. We will also study the synthesis of the production conditions resulting from geoclimate, and the trigger threshold will be the red level, which indicates poor and/or below. Finally, we will take into account the report of the previous rainy season, also provided by Geoclam. The trigger threshold will be a level below 50% of anomaly in relation to the historical average. If the threshold of rate of food insecurity and/or if the 2 thresholds relating to the synthesis of production conditions and the assessment of the previous rainy season are reached as of November, the second phase of forecast-based actions will then be triggered in order to anticipate the food crisis of the following year. Thus, as of November, these early actions will be implemented. Replenishing the reserves of cereal banks, which will allow the population to have access to cereals from the month of November until the next harvest at a subsidized price and in sufficient quantity to meet their needs. A conditional cash transfers to families so that they can obtain supplies from grain banks and build up reserves before prices rise or grains become unavailable. These 2 key measures will therefore allow families to better prepare themselves and apprehend, as early as November, the food and nutrition crisis to come in February of the following year. Ultimately, forecast-based actions reduce the impact of the upcoming drought and limit the expected costs of an emergency response.
Excuse me, Julie speaking. Uwe and Megan, if you can wrap up, please. So we have some Q&A. Thank you.
Julie, could you go to the next slide? That's Megan now.
Great. So I'll just quickly go over some of our challenges. One of the first challenges that we noticed is the perception of drought in the Sahel, and often drought means different things to different people. Sometimes people are even using the word drought as a synonym for crop failure for experiences where we wasn't actually below average rainfall, crop failure was produced by other conditions. So this was a challenge to make sure that we were all on the same page. We were talking about the same kinds of magnitude of events. The trigger had there were several challenges identifying the trigger. In particular, we had to assess the accuracy of a wide variety of seasonal forecasts. The Sahel region in particular is a very difficult area to forecast reliably. And so we have to keep in mind that there's a level of uncertainty in these seasonal forecasts, even with the strongest forecasts. And we decided to pair observations with those forecasts. So we have those later triggers that are based on observations of food insecurity, and also a crop monitor, which is essentially a satellite image that gives us a sense of the crop production. So we've tried to combine both forecasted elements and observed elements to increase our accuracy given some of the forecasting limitations within the Sahel. I would say another main challenge is gaps in coordination in other countries, where we've worked on forecast-based financing. Sometimes there has been much better collaboration between actors, very active working groups, for example. I can think of the example of Bangladesh, where we have, all the main actors working on forecast-based financing are sharing information quite readily. We have harmonized triggers. Same is true in Mongolia. There are many countries like this. That, for whatever reason, hasn't materialized yet in Niger. So there needs to be, I think, better coordination, ideally more harmonization of triggers, rather than different institutions developing their own triggering systems that will activate at different times for different people at different levels of magnitude. We also have a challenge in scaling up the actions that we've selected as the most beneficial for Zander. May not be the most beneficial for other agricultural other livelihood zones. And this makes the program, in terms of, for example, pre-stocking the items that you would need when you trigger, it becomes more complicated if you need to have different actions in different places, because the different ecological zones within Niger are so distinct. So there's quite a few complexities to trying to develop a program that's able to operate at national scale, in addition to the security concerns of certain parts of the country. So that is where we want to be working towards, of being able to go where the risk is highest relatively in any year where we trigger. That involves quite a bit more work to develop actions and relevant triggers and build the capacity of the local Red Cross office to be able to do that work across the entire country. Next slide. This is our last one, I think. Lessons learned, or maybe that was our ultimate one. Oh, no, we have more lessons learned. I've shared some of these already. The program in Niger has really forced us to think creatively about what we consider an early warning, including using observations, so just actual real-time observation of a growing need by using the crop monitor, rather than only looking at highly forecasted information, so a weather forecast. We've had to combine different indicators to try and to create something that we feel is really robust and would trigger at the frequency that we would like it to trigger at. So not triggering seasonally, but also not missing key events. So trying to target the years that we really think are beyond the coping capacity of populations. We need to evaluate this, of course. We've evaluated our work already when we triggered in floods, and then had a rethinking of what those actions would be for continual refinement. We need to do the same thing as this program starts to trigger over time. We'll do an impact evaluation of those actions and try and improve upon any actions that we think have not been the most helpful, or we're not really able to see discernible difference in the population. So I think it's my main lesson. My main point would be to space and to really we will evaluate as we go and try and refine it, and in terms of our trigger and our actions, and see what is the most useful going forward. But so far it's been a really interesting process. We've learned a lot, and we're now going to be scaling up in other parts of Niger. Over for me.
Thank you very much, Megan and Uwe. Now we'll have the example of Madagascar on addressing drought-induced food insecurity through forecast-based action. So we will be hearing from Dominique Semets, the program coordinator of Welthungerhilfe, and Julia Burakowski, junior expert in forecast-based action from Welthungerhilfe as well. Please, if you can keep the time to 10 minutes maximum for your presentation. Sorry for that. So we will have some time for the Q&A session. And also to remember to the participants, you have the link on the chat to the Q&A to leave your questions. Do not hesitate. We have a lot of questions for South Sudan. Do not hesitate to add questions for Niger and Madagascar. So Welthungerhilfe, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Julie, and thanks to everyone for having us. I myself and my colleague Julia are both coordinating our overall anticipatory action or forecast-based action program from Welthungerhilfe. And today we want to give you first a really short overview of how we do that, because I think for now we have had quite a lot of presentations from the colleague from Red Cross right now, but also yesterday from SAFE, and then go a bit deeper into how we do it at Madagascar. Actually, we had our first trigger there and want to share some lessons learned from the region. So, but I will directly hand over to Julia.
Yes, thank you so much. And maybe we can already go to the next slide. I will now introduce to you our forecast-based action program, which is also part of Welthungerhilfe's humanitarian paradigm shift towards more anticipation and preparedness. So Welthungerhilfe tries to strengthen its efforts in resilience building, anticipation, early warning, and early action, as well as emergency preparedness and response planning. So you can see on the left side, the icons are much smaller than the ones on the right side. So this always indicates how much focus we put on it. And we know we cannot prevent shocks from happening. That's why the size of the shock icon is the same on both sides. But through anticipation and preparedness, we try to mitigate losses and damages. And apart from just reducing these losses and damages, we are also able to better respond to the persistent residual effects of the shocks and are then able to better respond to the left emergency response needs, which you see below in this graph. So overall, with the humanitarian paradigm shift, we try to enable ourselves to enhance our overall humanitarian programming. If we can go to the next slide, please. So as you already heard, Dominic and I are part of the FBA program, which is implemented in Madagascar, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. The program runs since March 2020 and is funded by the GFFO. And our vision is to lay the foundation to mainstream anticipatory humanitarian action in Welthungerhilfe's humanitarian programming, but as already discussed, drive the humanitarian paradigm shift of the organization. The whole FBA approach piloted already in 2017. So now this is the follow-up program, which objective is to consolidate the development of the mechanism in Madagascar and extend the early action protocol coverage. From our pilot project, we have 6 early action protocols, and now we want to extend these further. And of course, we want to replicate the whole approach in Kenya and in Zimbabwe. And here, our main goal within our overall FBA approach is to create a very well-structured mechanism, which is scientifically backed and pre-financed. So we want to have a really good scientific drought trigger model. And pre-financing means we have a guaranteed funding behind our early action protocols. From our pilot project, we also already generated different lessons learned. You can see only a few listed here. We try to just focus on the ones which we think are relevant for this session. We, for instance, learned that we need to we for instance learned that we need to sensitize and involve the government structures on forecast-based action and enable other NGOs, especially local ones, to become part of the forecast-based action sphere. But I will explain this now in further detail on the next slide. So maybe we can go to the next slide. So for the first planning of the inclusion of government structures such as the National Disaster Risk Management Authorities and local and national meteorological offices, we scheduled for longer lead-in times. This helps us to get all relevant institutions on board, explain to them why FBA is relevant to them and their country, and then also get into the nitty-gritty details how FBA works and how we can work together on this. In this instance, we collaborate with the government, for instance, in the development of the scientific drought trigger model, but also we jointly develop our early action protocols, including the prioritization of most suitable early actions, so be it cash, be it anything else. And also we identify the potential windows of opportunities for respective early actions. And of course, working together with the government has various benefits for us. So of course, we ensure long-term access to the different regions we are working in, but we also see that there's a unique opportunity created in forecast-based action, which is the opportunity to coordinate. And this doesn't only mean Welthungerhilfe and the government, but we think of a wider coordination amongst all actors. So we think the three pillars, NGOs, Red Cross or UN agencies, and the government. Here we also would include existing coordination bodies such as the UN cluster system, where we can already from the beginning include sectoral and geographic coordination mechanisms from the beginning when implementing the FBA approach. And at the same time, we see new opportunities and potential for data sharing and knowledge transfer amongst all the different FBA actors. This is something which is already really what we're already doing on the Anticipation Hub. So this is where we share also our knowledge. We have our risk and vulnerability analysis is uploaded there, but also other actors greatly share their experience and data, and we also profit from this. So maybe next slide. Coming to our second learning from our pilot project, which is that we need to enable other actors to join the sphere of forecast-based action and participate in the opportunities FBA has to offer to them. For this, we created the so-called early action EAP custodianship process, in which START network members and their local partners can become so-called EAP custodians, which means that they are able to develop and implement their own early action protocols with or under the guidance and facilitation of Welthungerhilfe. And here we, especially through the involvement of local NGOs, want to ensure that the EAPs we develop or the other EAP custodians develop are locally contextualized, so they make sense for respective communities they are targeting. We also want to include local knowledge and create local ownership for an increased sustainability. So we don't want our EAPs to be some sort of documents which just collect dust in some kind of our desk drawers, but really are put to use. And also we want to include other NGOs to create more local acceptance of the approach. So the more NGOs engage, the more the approach is driven. And we want to increase the accountability towards targeted communities, meaning that early action protocol custodians normally have a long-term engagement with the communities. It's not a fly-in, fly-out humanitarian approach, but there are really some sort of relationship between the AP custodians and communities. And this is from my side. So I will hand over to Dominic now, who will walk you through our first trigger. Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much, Julia, for giving this overview. But I think now we are keen to look a bit more into the details of our first operational system and also our first trigger implementation, both in Madagascar. As Julia already explained, we built a scientific, trigger-based and also pre-financed mechanism consisting of a trigger or monitoring model and these localized EAPs you just heard about. And just to give you a bit more background, the monitoring or the trigger model, we use combines climatological indicators. We use the WRSI index and socioeconomic vulnerability data, which we gained from a household analysis we conducted. To be precise, I think Megan mentioned this as well in the presentation before, we do not really forecast a drought, but we rather monitor crop development during plant critical phases. And then the HEA analysis tells us basically what impact we are expecting from a bad season onto the food security throughout the year. And as it happened, we observed our first trigger in the north of Madagascar at the beginning of this year. I think you all heard of the big drought we have in the south, where we also implement our traditional humanitarian approach, let's say, but also in our pilot regions in the north, we had predicted a deterioration of food security for this year. So we implemented unconditional cash transfers for 1,500 vulnerable households. in the region. You have circled here, which was then kind of our first try out and pilot implementation. Let's move to the next slide, please. So the question is, how did we get there? How did we develop our intervention, our early action protocol? Because as you have heard, the core of our idea of our concept is our localized early action protocols, which are really participative, identified together with the communities, and then together with the communities and local stakeholders have this prioritization of early actions they are really keen to have. Therefore we identify basically the local coping strategies they have in the region to gain a knowledge or to know what people are most likely to do in case they face situations of food insecurity, and then identify the right entry points for us. This window of opportunity, how we call it, to really know the right time for the right action, and basically following the concept that we want to do this as late as possible, but as early as necessary. To ensure this humanitarian approach before the peak of the hunger season comes in. And in this case, we identified cash as the most appropriate in the region and for the timing. Can you click once, please, for the second side of the slide? Yeah, perfect. As I said, we during this year implemented unconditional cash transfers for the most vulnerable households in the region. We respectively distributed $10 a month over a period of 6 months, and we're also therefore aligning with the local social safety net. This cash transfer was then addressing different coping strategies by the household, either supporting what we identified as positive coping strategies or preventing what we identified before as negative coping strategies, and overall give all households the possibility to individually prepare for the lean season, for the peak of the hunger. That's what we did. And in the next slide, you can already see some lessons learned. Unfortunately, we are still analyzing our endline data and also are about to implement an impact benefit study to really get the evidence on the ground. However, what we can already say from our post-distribution monitorings, from the lessons we have, that what also applied for our overall project setup also applies in the small implementation. For example, that we really need to have this long-term financing, this long-term standing SOPs with the government, which are allowing us to guaranteed access in case of a scientific trigger and not just only later when a drought is declared, and also ensures the accountability, which is quite important for us as NGOs, towards the communities, towards the stakeholders, the families we work with. Further, I think the first analysis I've seen is the early cash was perceived as quite helpful to prepare for the situation. But what was even more important at this point was the need for clear information, not just information exchange with the government, but also this crucial information campaign with the target community, not just about the trigger, about the forecasted drought, but also about what they expect from the project, what role it has in the overall humanitarian role. Yes, and I think we shorted it now a bit, but now we have more time for questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you so much for all these three rich presentations on three different contexts. We have a bit less time for the question and answer, so I will, sorry. Oops, I lost my screen. Okay. I'm not able to switch on my video if someone from the technical side can help me. All right, I will choose maybe three questions as we are a bit late. And okay, so first questions for South Sudan. Regarding, so maybe a question for NRC and ADRA, two questions. Did you face challenges or obstacles in introducing rice cultivation to deal with the continued flooding? And another question that can be linked, if floods don't happen in the future, is the upland rice adaptable to drier situations?
Yeah.
So for John or Dume.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Julie. Okay. Basically, for piloting, we've not really had a lot of challenges. I mean, as I said, we just started with 5 veterans, but you know, for some reason, you know, we've not had a lot of challenges. You know, with the farmers. I mean, there could be a little bit of issues, especially when it comes to leper, but it's something we have to look into because initially they were used to, you know, not farming under, you know, flood conditions or waterlogged conditions. Yeah, but yeah, it's maybe one of the challenges that we've faced so far. But yeah. Then what was the other question?
For ADRA, really we have not faced any major challenges. This was our first year. And for the communities, what was an excitement was at least a crop can survive under the waterlogged conditions. But I see this question also that is asking about the upland rice. I'm not going to answer on that directly, but what I'll say is under the research and learning that we talked about in the presentation, this is one of the things that we need to do. Look at different varieties, maybe do an experiment to see how the different varieties will fare under the waterlogged conditions and the rainfall, what we do. Because for the ADRA pilot, at some stage we didn't have lots of water, so they had to open the dikes so that they let in the water into the field to have the flooding condition again. So I think, yes, it's a very good thing that people need to look at and need to bring into the research and learning.
Thank you very much for those answers. So maybe taking a question that could be for Niger or Madagascar in terms of drought context. What are the mitigation measures that you have been considering against droughts? Might be a very general question.
Was it? No, I'm not looking at the Menti slide right now, but was it migration, or did I read that? Were they asking about migration, how we consider migration in this, or have I confused it rather than mitigation? Okay. Well, if it's mitigation.
Yeah, sorry, this question might not be very clear. Sorry, we can switch to another question. We'd be interested to hear from the presenters on the roles of opportunities, if any, they see for shock responsive safety nets or pre-shock responsive safety nets in relation to early action. We can ask this question to Niger or Madagascar team.
Maybe I can come in directly. I think these are quite promising opportunities because then we already have a lot of infrastructure laid out. We have maybe even targeting laid out already. And what we are doing already is at least aligning it with the existing social safety nets. If we have identified, for example, the amount of early cash. And I think it can also be used to phase out, for example, early actions where we have a phase out before the lean season come. So for example, the post-shock safety net can then come in during the lean season and we have a more of a smooth overview. And of course, also it would be great if the government social safety nets would even like add on anticipatory action, if they even are financed or implemented or then stocked up based on early warnings from the IPC, for example, if they really see a deterioration in food insecurity in the region.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Niger, you want to add on that related to your context?
Sorry, yeah, Megan, who's been following everything Niger, her computer just crashed, so she's trying to join again. So yeah, sorry.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. I can. So you want to? Okay, I can go to another question. For South Sudan, this is an interesting question. You have mentioned that flood is due to rainfall in other states. So are you linked to early warning systems of the neighboring countries? Anyone from South Sudan, if you would like to reply?
Yeah, we're in an unusual situation whereby we're surrounded by countries that are experiencing drought and low rainfall and drought situation, and yet we're experiencing flooding because the floods are being driven from outside of the from outside of the country. I'm forgetting the question now.
Are we linked to early warning?
Yes, very much so. And I think more and more we have had quite excellent weather, satellite imagery data, and things like that. One of the big challenges for our flooding situation at the moment is that it does require advocacy on a regional level, because water levels in Uganda and Tanzania and other locations very, very high. They have to get rid of their water. So I mean, it's a really difficult challenge. They have to move their water on, otherwise they'll be plagued by that. But the consequences are very negative for people living in the Sud wetlands in the Nile floodplains. Over.
Thank you, Alistair. Another question for South Sudan, maybe for Thomas, but let's see. Were there any multi-year mapping using the historical approach to understand which areas most affected, with any trend analysis could indicate future possibility of re-flooded areas? Sorry, the question is a bit long and maybe some words are missing. If we can have it on the screen. Yes, no, yes, this one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julia. Yeah, like I said, we are at the initial stages of flood resilience measurement for communities implementation. When I was going through the slide on community scoping work, we said that was the initial contact with the communities, where I think in the slide there was a table where we had actually been trying to engage them on the flood trends from 1999 up to 2020. Like what was the situation? How does it look like from here to here in terms of displacement, in terms of destruction of crop spill and infrastructure? So we are actually at the initial stage, and we are going to map like the historical trends of the flooding, and what mitigation measures do the community have, at their own level in terms of flood resilience. So we still have a long way to go, but we are going to collect all the information and try to have a map, and from there we can be able to come up with community programs or interventions based on the information that we are going to collect from the communities. I hope this addresses the questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Thomas. So looking at the time, we can maybe take a last question. So the question I took last time, it was there was a mistake in the word. So maybe the question for Madagascar or Niger about if you can share examples of what kind of mitigation measures against drought that could be relevant in your context of intervention.
Hi, I can jump in. I think this is an important question. I think to a certain extent, we need to accept that the impacts of drought are very difficult to mitigate. You know, we can have no effect on the rainfall, and often I think we have found it to be probably more viable to try and not mitigate the impacts in terms of how rainfall is experienced in the production of food, but rather how people are able to manage that or how they're able to cope with that through cash. Our first activity that we do based on seasonal forecasts is to distribute fast maturing seeds. And we think there is some viability in doing that, but we also appreciate that the returns might be more limited, and which is why we pair those actions with later cash transfers to help people cope, because it's we need to be realistic about how well alternative kinds of seeds will be able to mitigate the losses as opposed that families will experience, as opposed to if they had optimal rainfall conditions. So we do try, but I think we're also trying to be realistic about how effective we can be in those measures, and rather try and support populations to cope with losses. Over for me.
Maybe just shortly to add from my side, because I think it's quite interesting also what Megan said. And in addition to that, we have to consider that actions actually like addressed to the drought itself, mostly then agriculture activities, are also highly sensitive, because we have to implement them quite early, where the uncertainty of the weather is also, or the forecast, uncertainty of the forecast is really high. And every action we then do together with farmers and really steer them or encourage them to do things differently has then also to do with accountability. What happens if the drought actually is not coming? So there only no regret measures would really apply, but not really behavioral or agricultural large-scale interventions only. Yeah, that's also quite difficulty we have to face, I think, what to do when, and how accountable are we, and how certain are we for our interventions. Thanks.
Thank you, Dominique. Thank you to everybody. We'll finish here for the questions. Sorry for the questions that were not selected, but don't worry, all the questions that were not selected will get an answer in the final report. So now, thank you to all the climate-related speakers. It was really rich. And now we will go to the next session, session 4 on environment, which is, of course, a topic very linked with climate. So in this session, we will look at how to make humanitarian responses environmentally aware. And just to say that, as you know, we are mostly working with rural population. Those rural populations, they live on natural resources most of the time for their livelihoods. And of course, those natural resources are both affected by climatic shock, but also all what is linked with environmental degradation. So environment it's the first time in the GFSC meeting, as far as I know, that we mentioned this topic in a full session. So I'm very pleased to welcome for this session Véronique de Geoffroy from URD Group and William Reinierson, from UNEP OCHA Joint Environment Unit. Just before you start, please speak slowly. As we have interpretation ongoing, and it's not easy for them when you speak too rapidly. And also for you to know that we decided the intervention from Veronique to be in French. And I'm very pleased as a French person for this choice, because we want also to promote a bit Francophonie and the French-speaking organizations. So you will have the interpretation in English if you see on the right side, bottom right side on the Zoom bar, you have interpretation, so you can switch to English interpretation. So if you can switch off your video, Veronique, as you restart for Group URD. So you're the Executive Director of Group URD. Thank you very much for speaking today on environmental impact of humanitarian intervention. So the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup pour cette session qui, en effet, me semble importante et arrivée à un moment crucial. Donc, en quelques mots, avant de démarrer le cœur de ma présentation, vous décrire le groupe URD et nos travaux sur la question de l'environnement. En fait, on travaille sur les situations de crise et de fragilité déjà depuis presque 30 ans. Et on a commencé à travailler sur la réduction de l'empreinte environnementale de l'aide il y a déjà une bonne dizaine d'années, notamment avec un groupe d'ONG françaises qui sont rassemblées dans le réseau environnement humanitaire, qui se préoccupaient déjà de la réduction de leur empreinte environnementale. On a fait pas mal de travaux pour la DG ECO ces derniers temps, des travaux de recherche opérationnelle. Si vous êtes intéressé, vous trouverez plus d'informations sur le site du groupe URD. Mais on aborde aussi la question sous un angle plus global de l'adaptation du secteur de l'aide face aux risques systémiques. Donc effectivement, la question du changement climatique, de la crise environnementale. Donc on a fait plusieurs événements sur ce sujet-là et on appuie actuellement l'initiative Prepare qui est dédiée justement à l'adaptation du secteur de l'aide aux questions de climat et d'environnement. Voilà, donc les présentations précédentes ont déjà fait état d'impacts différenciés du changement climatique qui est déjà bien réel. Les rapports du GIEC ne laissent plus de doute à la fois sur l'évolution du climat et des températures à la surface du globe et plus de doute non plus sur le fait que ce sont les effets des activités humaines qui ont ces impacts-là. Donc, les acteurs humanitaires sont bien placés déjà pour, comme vous l'avez souligné déjà depuis plus d'une heure, les organisations humanitaires sont témoins en fait des impacts déjà de ce changement climatique sur les populations les plus fragiles qui en plus sont celles qui ont le moins contribué au changement climatique. Mais il faut aussi remettre cette question du changement climatique dans son contexte plus large, et Julie le soulignait, la question de la dégradation des environnements, qu'elles soient liées au changement climatique ou aux pollutions par le plastique ou à la chute de la biodiversité liée au changement climatique, mais aussi à l'usage des pesticides, font peser aujourd'hui des risques qualifiés d'existentiels pour l'humanité. C'est d'ailleurs dans l'introduction de la charte pour l'environnement et le climat rappeler en préambule qu'effectivement aujourd'hui ce sont des risques existentiels qui doivent du coup susciter une réaction de la part de l'ensemble des acteurs, dont les acteurs du secteur de l'aide. Donc évidemment, ce n'est pas l'action humanitaire qui va pouvoir résoudre l'ensemble des enjeux, mais l'aide humanitaire, voilà, de par sa place auprès des populations les plus fragiles, de par ses capacités d'action et son exemplarité, doit pouvoir intervenir en fait sur trois types d'interactions entre environnement et action humanitaire. prendre en compte l'impact des crises humanitaires sur l'environnement. On le sait, les conflits, les déplacements de population, les tremblements de terre, les tsunamis ont des impacts durables sur l'environnement. Prendre en compte les défis environnementaux qui engendrent ou qui aggravent des crises humanitaires, mais aussi les impacts que peuvent avoir les opérations humanitaires sur l'environnement. Donc, ce sont ces trois types de relations qu'on va balayer ensemble. Les impacts du changement climatique sur les crises humanitaires, donc ce sont effectivement des catastrophes dites naturelles qui sont plus violentes, plus fréquentes, avec, on l'a vu, des sécheresses, des inondations plus importantes, plus récurrentes sur des terrains fragiles, donc avec des augmentations des déplacements. Alors, vous connaissez les débats sur le nombre de déplacés liés par exemple au changement climatique d'ici 20 ou 30 ans. C'est très difficile, les calculs sont évidemment, la projection en termes de chiffres, la projection est complexe. Je crois qu'on peut dire qu'un doublement des déplacements n'est pas du tout irréaliste. Et même s'il est difficile de faire des liens de causalité directs entre le changement climatique et les conflits, quoique certains s'avancent à les faire, notamment pour la Syrie ou d'autres contextes, ce qui est sûr, c'est que les questions du changement climatique ou de l'environnement aggravent la vulnérabilité des populations dans les situations de conflit. Les derniers travaux qu'on a fait pour ANALP, on vient de coordonner l'étude qui s'appelle « Adapter l'aide humanitaire aux effets du changement climatique », nous a amené à questionner des acteurs humanitaires sur les différents continents pour comprendre leur propre analyse de l'évolution des crises du fait du changement climatique. Et ce qui était intéressant, c'est ces trois types de crises vues par les acteurs humanitaires, celles qu'on connaît, les désastres sur lesquels les organisations humanitaires ont l'habitude de répondre, les sécheresses, les cyclones, les inondations. Mais en fait, il y a d'autres catégories, il y a ce qu'on connaît, mais qui commencent à avoir des façons de se développer étranges, donc avec des nouvelles caractéristiques, par exemple des cyclones qui vont prendre des routes inhabituelles, qui vont devenir très violentes en quelques heures alors qu'il fallait quelques jours auparavant, ou des cycles de sécheresse, on l'a vu, qui au lieu d'être une fois tous les 10 ans, sont récurrentes presque tous les ans. Et là, c'est pas tant qu'il faut savoir faire plus, mais probablement qu'il faut faire différemment. Et puis, il y a ces crises qu'on commence à voir arriver, mais qu'on ne connaît pas réellement. Un bon exemple, c'est les vagues de chaleur. Par exemple, en Inde, qui commencent à faire des victimes qui se dénombrent par dizaines de milliers, des vagues de chaleur dans les zones très humides, qui rendent des zones invivables, ou d'autres types de catastrophes en cascade, catastrophes ou crises dites systémiques, ou un peu comme un château de cartes. Et le meilleur exemple, même s'il est difficile de le lier directement à la crise environnementale, c'est la crise qu'on connaît actuelle de Covid, avec les effets boule de neige, les cascades, et ça laisse présager ou ça donne une idée du type de crise potentielle à venir. Donc, un autre point d'entrée, c'est effectivement les impacts de l'aide humanitaire, les impacts directs, ou plus ou moins directs de l'aide humanitaire, l'empreinte environnementale de l'aide. Et là, ils sont nombreux, en fait, et on peut les classer sous différentes catégories. Il y a les impacts directs, par exemple, effectivement, des contenants de la distribution qu'on retrouve dans des déchets directement autour des camps, par exemple, ou des impacts indirects, par exemple des vols qui sont pris pour le fret ou pour les travailleurs humanitaires, des impacts qui peuvent être localisés, par exemple des auréoles de déforestation autour des camps, parce que effectivement, on le sait, un camp, c'est aussi de la consommation de bois, par exemple pour la cuisson des aliments, mais c'est aussi l'usage du bois ou du sable pour la construction des habits. Donc ça, des impacts localisés ou des impacts globaux. À nouveau, en prenant l'exemple là des émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Après, ça peut être des impacts de court terme, comme les déchets qu'on voit très rapidement, ou de long terme, avec des impacts sur les nappes phréatiques, trop utilisées dans certaines zones. Donc, on a bien effectivement des impacts différenciés, diversifiés, soit liés au programme aussi, ou au mode de fonctionnement des organisations. Alors, par rapport à ça, quelles solutions? Alors déjà, une approche qui est adaptée, pour ceux qui connaissent, de la pyramide de gestion des déchets, c'est commencer par le bas de la pyramide, à identifier les fragilités environnementales dans un contexte donné, identifier des risques spécifiques d'un projet en fonction du secteur d'intervention, chercher les solutions pour éviter certains risques, certains impacts négatifs ou les réduire, réfléchir à comment on peut réparer, compenser, mais aussi, dans certains cas, trouver des solutions pour maximiser des impacts positifs. Je vais vous donner des exemples dans les prochaines diapos. Ce qu'il faut retenir à ce stade, c'est qu'il n'y a pas de solution magique, hein, vous le savez. Chaque solution est à adapter au contexte particulier, alors rural ou urbain, un climat tropical ou sec, c'est aussi adapté en fonction du secteur d'intervention, du type de crise, de la durée du projet. Voilà. Après, c'est souvent des mélanges de solutions. Il y a des solutions techniques, il y a des enjeux techniques derrière tout ça, mais parfois, c'est aussi simplement des changements d'ordre comportemental. Et voilà, on ne part pas du tout de zéro, en fait. Il y a déjà beaucoup de ressources qui sont disponibles pour guider les acteurs de l'aide. Donc, quelques exemples dans le secteur qui nous intéresse aujourd'hui. C'est l'exemple, le secteur de sécurité alimentaire. Donc, on va pouvoir avoir, par exemple, tenter de limiter des impacts négatifs en intégrant les besoins en cuisson dans les programmes. Voilà, là, c'est un exemple. Par exemple, distribuer des cuiseurs solaires pour éviter la déforestation autour des camps, ou des cuiseurs à bois économes, ou le GPL. Vous connaissez certains programmes phares, par exemple, je crois à Cox's Bazar, de distribution de GPL qui ont eu un impact très direct sur la déforestation. Mais il peut aussi y avoir des projets qui vont à la fois du coup limiter, par exemple, les déchets et en même temps chercher à avoir un impact positif à travers la formation au compostage pour créer des fertilisants biologiques pour l'agriculture. Il peut y avoir la mise en place de systèmes de récupération des eaux de pluie pour l'utilisation agricole, sachant qu'effectivement, l'agriculture est la deuxième source de consommation en eau. D'autres exemples positifs seraient par exemple la distribution de semences adaptées aux contraintes locales, mais aussi tenant compte des effets du changement climatique. Des exemples qui nous ont été donnés dans les sessions précédentes étaient vraiment voilà, des exemples positifs de recherche de renforcement de la résilience des populations sur un territoire donné. Évidemment, à nouveau, qui va s'adapter à chaque fois au contexte particulier d'intervention et donc avec une attention particulière pour l'accès aux ressources dans les systèmes pastoraux. Voilà pour ces exemples-là. Sur les distributions, il peut y avoir des choses qui se mettent déjà en place aujourd'hui hein, dans beaucoup de contextes. Il faudrait que ça soit systématisé, c'est pas très compliqué, mais c'est avoir une réflexion de fond sur le packaging de l'aide humanitaire. Et je sais que beaucoup y travaillent et certains bailleurs de fonds aussi y travaillent. Donc, voir dans quelle mesure on peut aussi travailler sur beaucoup de vrac avec du coup des contenants réutilisables plutôt que de faire des distributions avec l'utilisation de plastique. Ou alors choisir des matériaux qui vont être recyclables localement. Voilà, choisir dans les distributions des matériaux plutôt de qualité qui auront une durée de vie plus longue pour éviter la multiplication des déchets. privilégier des achats de produits labellisés, durables. Par exemple, il y avait une étude qui a été faite sur l'huile de palme, qui est à ce jour difficile à être complètement remplacée, mais on peut privilégier des filières plus labellisées durables. Ou chercher d'autres alternatives, ça serait encore mieux. Et soutenir, par exemple, des initiatives de recyclage local, ça peut même créer des filières. Il y a des exemples que vous connaissez certainement dans certaines zones de création de filières de recyclage local. Ou quand on va favoriser les produits locaux et l'agriculture paysanne, là, on va vraiment avoir une externalité positive, non seulement réduire les impacts négatifs, mais avoir des impacts positifs sur un contexte donné. La modalité cash, effectivement, est devenue aujourd'hui centrale dans le secteur de l'aide. C'est autour de 20% de l'aide qui est distribuée en cash. Donc, effectivement, souvent, on a la réflexion que comme c'est des achats qui vont être locaux, ça sera nécessairement plus durable et avec un impact moindre sur l'environnement. Alors, l'étude qu'on a fait sur ce sujet-là dit que le lien n'est pas si simple. Il n'y a pas nécessairement de nette réduction de l'empreinte de l'aide à travers la modalité cash. Acheter local ne veut pas forcément dire durable. Par exemple, si on laisse le choix et que du coup on va acheter au moins cher sur le marché local, ça sera peut-être des produits chinois qui seront ni durables, ni avec une empreinte environnementale nécessairement moindre. Donc, les impacts environnementaux des interventions monétaires sont peut-être plus complexes, du coup, à mesurer et à comprendre, plus diffuses. Ça pose la question même d'un transfert de responsabilité aux bénéficiaires. Donc, ça demande à être mieux réfléchi probablement, mais il y a aussi des opportunités pour tenter de réduire effectivement les externalités négatives de ce type de programme. Par exemple, avec la conditionnalité, des coupons qui donnent accès à des produits qui ont été négociés avec des fournisseurs de qualité, avec moins de packaging, par exemple. Ça permet déjà de réduire l'impact environnemental du cash. Et on peut aussi, par exemple, inclure les besoins en énergie dans le panier de la ménagère pour s'assurer effectivement de mitiguer du coup, les impacts négatifs potentiels. Donc là, voilà, c'était un focus sur 3 sous-secteurs pour tenter d'illustrer en fait cette approche de réflexion sur quels sont les risques dans un contexte donné en fonction du type de programme, quelles sont les fragilités d'un contexte donné, les risques particuliers en fonction du secteur, et à ce moment-là, comment est-ce qu'on peut limiter, mitiger ou voire même renforcer les impacts positifs d'une action bien conçue. Donc, je crois qu'aujourd'hui, cette réflexion, elle a vraiment évolué dans le secteur de l'aide, notamment depuis 2-3 ans. Il y a, je pense, une prise de conscience à l'image de la prise de conscience dans l'opinion publique et chez l'ensemble des sociétés. Donc, une plus grande prise de conscience aussi au sein des organisations. Au niveau de ce réseau environnement humanitaire, il y a eu une lettre d'engagement l'année dernière, à peu près à cette époque, d'un certain nombre d'organisations, d'une dizaine d'organisations pour, je dirais, appliquer les accords de Paris à l'échelle de nos organisations et avec un engagement de réduction de 50% de nos émissions de gaz à effet de serre à l'objectif 2030. Donc ça, ce sont les objectifs des accords de Paris que chaque secteur d'intervention doit appliquer, donc avec du coup une réflexion, par exemple, au sein du groupe URD sur ce que ça veut dire et comment on va y arriver. Donc, ce sont des changements de paradigme, mais c'est aussi possible de réfléchir à ça et de changer nos façons de faire. Il y a aussi la charte pour le climat et l'environnement des organisations humanitaires qui a été élaborée et diffusée cette année. Et je vous invite à en prendre connaissance, alors soit dans une dynamique pour aller la signer, mais aussi en termes pédagogiques pour voir quels sont les engagements qui sont proposés et aussi les pistes de réflexion pour la mise en œuvre de ces engagements. C'est très intéressant de prendre connaissance de ça. Et c'est vrai qu'aujourd'hui, on voit des changements de pratique à la fois sur les terrains d'intervention et dans les organisations, avec y compris des postes qui commencent à être créés de chargés de ces questions-là, de chargés d'environnement. Donc, ce sont des évolutions positives qui vont aussi dans le sens d'une exigence accrue des bailleurs de fonds d'intégrer ces questions-là de façon systématique à la fois dans les programmes et au sein des organisations, avec de plus en plus de bailleurs en fait qui se mettent d'accord pour relever un peu le niveau d'exigence sur ces enjeux. Et des évolutions récentes et encore en cours au sein de la DG ECO. Voilà. Pour terminer, quelques enjeux clés qui croisent à la fois un certain nombre des recommandations de la charte pour l'environnement et le climat, mais aussi les résultats de nos travaux qu'on a pu faire à différents niveaux et notamment la dernière étude pour Alpes. Donc, il y a un enjeu d'investir, je dirais, lourdement et très sérieusement dans l'anticipation, donc à la fois dans tout ce qui est disaster risk reduction, renforcement de la résilience, la préparation au risque, voilà, sans que ça soit vu comme une affaire de spécialiste, mais que ça soit bien quelque chose de très transversal au sein des programmes et des organisations, en innovant, en testant, en apprenant et pour ça, en se basant aussi sur une gestion adaptative. On ne peut pas appliquer les leçons du passé vu qu'on commence à rentrer dans des zones d'incertitude, comme je le disais en introduction. Donc, ça veut dire qu'il faut mettre en place des programmes, se baser le plus possible sur des travaux scientifiques, mais apprendre au fil de l'eau tout en mettant en œuvre les actions. Ça implique aussi certainement une décentralisation de la prise de décision. Il y a encore besoin de mieux comprendre les risques, les vulnérabilités des territoires, de développer des solutions basées sur les preuves. L'une des conclusions de nos travaux pour Alpes, c'était que on voit cette bascule très forte sur tout ce qui est renforcement de la résilience, etc. Ce qui va dans le bon sens, mais avec finalement très peu d'arguments basés sur des preuves sur l'efficacité de ce type de programme. Qu'est-ce qui fait l'efficacité d'un programme de renforcement de la résilience? Donc, il y a encore besoin d'investir à ce niveau-là. On l'a vu, la réduction de l'empreinte environnementale est essentielle au niveau des programmes et il faut travailler aussi à la réduction des émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Et je pense que cet objectif de réduction ou de se caler sur les accords de Paris, c'est quelque chose, voilà, le secteur se doit d'être exemplaire. Donc, il y a un enjeu à ce niveau-là. Voilà. Ensuite, en tant qu'organisation humanitaire, qu'elle soit locale, nationale et internationale, il y a une responsabilité de travailler ensemble pour réduire l'impact des crises, donc en accélérant notre propre action, mais aussi en mobilisant d'autres acteurs à faire de même, hein, que ce soit donc au sein du cluster, au sein du secteur de l'aide, mais au-delà aussi. C'est évidemment, vu l'ampleur des risques et des enjeux, c'est une question à la fois qui se pose au niveau des différents États. C'est une question, on l'a vu lors de la COP26, c'est une question de solidarité entre États. Donc, c'est aussi de la collaboration avec les agences nationales de gestion des désastres, les NDMA, mais aussi avec le secteur universitaire, le secteur privé. Ça n'est pas une question seulement humanitaire, c'est évidemment quelque chose qui dépasse le secteur. Alors, toutes ces réflexions, évidemment, redonnent une place centrale aux acteurs locaux, qui sont déjà en première ligne, finalement, de tous ces enjeux, mais qui ne sont pas toujours reconnus comme tels. Donc, je dirais même au-delà de la localisation, c'est vraiment la capacité à soutenir les réponses portées au niveau local dont il s'agit. Donc, il y a encore beaucoup à faire pour le secteur formel de l'aide, pour mieux comprendre ses capacités locales, qu'elles soient formelles ou informelles, et les moyens de les soutenir. J'arrive vraiment à la fin, donc il faut aussi juste rappeler que ces questions-là sont politiques, et donc il y a un enjeu d'utiliser notre influence pour mobiliser les acteurs vers des réponses plus courageuses et justes. Et enfin, et ça sera mon dernier mot, pour avancer dans ce contexte-là comme dans d'autres, il nous faut des objectifs clairs et savoir mesurer nos efforts, savoir effectivement mettre de la méthode et développer les outils pour avancer de façon systématique. Donc, je pense qu'il faut aussi avoir les bons outils, et je sais, pour avoir suivi les évolutions de l'outil NIT+, que c'est aussi ce genre d'outil qui peut aider à transformer les approches et les pratiques. Voilà, je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Véronique. Thank you very much. It was a challenging presentation. We have asked you a lot of things. I'm hearing the French at the same time, sorry. So yeah, this presentation was really rich. And now we will have the presentation from William Reinierson on a very concrete and operational tool to be able to assess the environmental impact of our interventions. So please, William, floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, Julie. Can you see and hear my slides? Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you, we see you, and we see the PowerPoint.
Great, thank you. Merci beaucoup, Véronique. Thank you, everyone. My name is Will Reinierson. I'm a project analyst working on the Nexus environmental assessment tool, which is a tool that is hosted by the UNEP-OCHA Joint Environment Unit. So I'll be explaining a bit about what the tool is and some specific food security aspects of the tool. So as Véronique mentioned, humanitarian crises are increasingly driven by environmental emergencies. This is true globally, and it's caused by both disasters and environmental degradation. While humanitarians don't fully, if humanitarians don't fully account for the environment's role in their operations, they can do more harm than good. And this is where the Joint Environment Unit comes in. Founded in 1994, the UNEP-OCHA Joint Environment Unit, or the JEU, looks at the environmental dimensions of emergencies, and it's housed under OCHA's Response Support Branch. It has two main work streams, the first being environmental emergencies, including the rapid mobilization and deployment of environmental experts. There's also a second work stream, the sustainability of humanitarian action. This includes things like policy review and coordination, guided learning, and humanitarian tools, one of which is the Nexus environmental assessment tool. The NEAT Plus, as I'll call it, is a simple project level screening tool for humanitarian contexts. What this means is it's a questionnaire for humanitarians written in language that humanitarians understand, and it doesn't require complicated environmental expertise. It's a questionnaire which matches environmental data with site-specific activity-based questions. So questions that can be answered, we think, quite easily from people who are working on the ground on a project. From these answers, there's a back-end calculation, and what results are a list of standardized and ranked environmental sensitivities. So these are standardized and comparable across space, and across time, and also across organizations. The NEAT Plus is best used after life-saving needs have been met, but as early as possible, as soon as 48 hours after sudden onset emergency or crises. It's also well used before project implementation or expansion. The JU covers other shorter term aspects of the environmental dimensions of emergencies with tools such as the Rapid Environmental Assessment tool. So the NEAT Plus has several purposes, the first being programmatic. So this helps with project screening, design, and proposal, and also can act as the basis for subsequent, more in-depth environmental impact assessments. The NEAT Plus can also be organizational. It can be used for audit purposes, fundraising, and a baseline for global operation comparison. And the tool can also be used for advocacy, both within the organization and outside, by raising awareness and increasing communication of environmental aspects of humanitarian intervention. The NEAT Plus has been used by dozens of partner organizations all over the world. Here are some of them, and 2021 has not stopped the use of the NEAT Plus. So right now, the NEAT Plus is grouped into two versions. Our end goal is to have them back into one unified version, but hopefully I'll explain why we have these two versions here. The first is the original NEAT Plus, which we're now calling the Rural NEAT Plus or the RNEAT Plus. And this was built in 2018 for camp and rural settings. And it uses Excel and Kobo Toolbox as the technical platform for this. New to this year in 2021 is the Urban NEAT, and this was built for humanitarian operations in urban areas. It's increased in scope with roughly double the number of questions as are in the Rural NEAT, and it's built upon a custom cloud platform. We're doing this Urban NEAT both for urban trends in displacement and humanitarian activities, and also to increase usability for organizations using the tool, as well as data analytics. So the NEAT technical structure is broken into several modules. The first is green on the left, the required environmental sensitivity module. This can be referred to as the core module and acts as the baseline screening tool. So all users of the NEAT Plus conduct an assessment of the environmental sensitivities module, and this is in both the rural and the urban NEAT. From this, there are a list of sensitivity statements that are resulted, and this gives a good broad overview baseline picture of the environmental impacts of these humanitarian actions being assessed. From there, there are additional optional activity modules, and these, as you can see on screen, we have 3 for the rural NEAT, shelter, wash, and food security. And then new for the urban NEAT, we have the health module and the livelihoods module. Right now in the urban NEAT, the shelter module is implemented, and we hope to have the food security module implemented next, and then the remaining activity modules every month or so over the next few months. This is to say that it's quite simple, we think, for the user to use this framework of modules. However, on the back end, there's quite a bit going on with logic matrices and calculations. So we try to hide that as much as possible for the usability perspective. I'll quickly go through this checklist of what's needed to conduct a NEAT Plus assessment. For the rural NEAT, download the latest version of the tool from eecenter.org/NEAT. This can be done every few months or so, as the tool is quite stable, so we don't often release new versions, as most of our development efforts are going into the urban NEAT. An internet connection is required for setting up the rural NEAT and is required for initially going to neatplus.org to use the urban NEAT. However, both versions can collect data offline. Having a project manager or people with field level experience and familiarity is quite important and will make assessing conducting NEAT Plus assessments much easier. And as is having activity specialists such as WASH, shelter, food security, etc., if these activity modules are being conducted. Finally, it's very good to appoint someone who will be in charge of this data management for both versions. So once a rural NEAT environmental sensitivity module is completed, the results are presented like this. We use a traffic light system, so we show issues of higher, medium, and lower concern listed here. And then from that, there is a list of additional information, as well as mitigation tips. And these are actions that humanitarians can take immediately or in the future to mitigate these environmental sensitivities. Looking at the structure specifically of the food security submodules, for the rural NEAT, the food security and livelihoods are put into one activity module. And there are 75 questions grouped into 4 submodules. So it's important to remember that each activity module is optional, as is each submodule. So users can pick and choose from any of the submodule groupings. For the urban NEAT, due to increased complexity in urban situations and increased scoping in the tool, there are 93 questions grouped into 6 submodules, just looking at food security. And there are 10 sections looking at livelihoods in the urban NEAT. We can look at a few examples here. So for example, these are some questions in the rural NEAT regarding direct food assistance. And these are some questions looking at livestock. When the activity modules in the rural NEAT are completed, in this case for the food security module, there is a summary report which lists baseline warnings for the activity modules. It goes into more detail with a sector summary, as well as providing commentary during the rural NEAT assessment. The urban NEAT tries to combine many of these summary and reporting things into one dashboard. So as we can see here, users can go onto neatplus.org and they're presented a dashboard that has an overview of one or multiple surveys grouped into projects. These surveys have listed higher, medium, and lower concern environmental sensitivities, and then users can get more detail in the sensitivity module and the activity modules. They can then click through into groupings of these statements to see additional information, mitigations, and also new for the urban NEAT, opportunities that can help bridge the gap between the humanitarian and the development sectors. We'll look quickly at an example that used the food security and livelihoods module of the rural NEAT. This was done in Myanmar in October 2019 with the Joint Environment Unit and NRC. 2 villages were looked at within Cayenne State, which hosted over 5,000 internally displaced persons. During this pilot testing, there were 2 modules which were tested, the core environmental sensitivities module and the food security and livelihoods module in one of the 2 villages. There was quite a long and extensive report which was published, which I can share a link to momentarily, or if you go to eecenter.org, just search for Myanmar NEAT Plus, and you'll find the findings of this report. But some of the key ones were that there is a large need for environmental screening tools such as the NEAT Plus. However, at the time and still now, there is a low capacity within the humanitarian sector, either for individual organizations to create these sorts of tools or to use a standardized tool within the sector. So we hope that the NEAT Plus can serve that purpose. They also found that the food security and livelihoods findings matched NRC's expected mitigation plans. And we found with other organizations that the mitigations offered either match or help determine the actual mitigations which are taken by the organization. Finally, we're looking at pilot testing the urban need. So the tool is still technically in a development phase, as we only have some of the activity modules implemented. Most of the content is developed, but we need to work more on linking the questions, answers, and sensitivity statements. So generally, if you're looking to and willing and interested in pilot testing the urban need, we would very much appreciate your feedback, both on the content, but also on the user interface and ease of use. So please go to this form here, as this will provide an onboarding experience. Otherwise, you can go directly to needplus.org and create an account and join an organization. Further, if you're able to provide specific review for our food security module, which is coming up, we have a little bit more technical review process planned. If you're interested and able, we would very much appreciate it. Please email me at william.reinerson@un.org, and I can share those details with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very interesting and operational presentation. So we are a bit running late. Let me just go to the questions. We decided to skip the questions to 10 minutes. So maybe we can start with questions for you, Will, on NEAT. I selected the 2 questions. The first question is, to what extent has the NEAT been promoted and accepted by the WASH and shelter clusters? And is there a cross-cluster buy-in for it? This is the first question. And the second one, are these NEAT modules designed to cater the needs and applicable to every country having different geographical orientation, or needs customization while applying to a specific country context?
Thank you for those 2 questions. As for acceptance from the clusters, every cluster listed in those activity modules for the rural need has been consulted back during the development of the tool in 2017 and 2018, from my understanding. I wasn't working on the NEAT Plus at that time. For the urban NEAT, yes, we are working with the clusters as well on this. We are working currently with the shelter cluster and plan on working with the remaining clusters. They have been worked with in the development, and we continue to for the implementation of these activity modules. And as for global applicability, the tool is designed to be a global tool. So some of the answers in the questions will even refer to polar climates for ecosystems. So hopefully there aren't many humanitarian interventions in polar environments right now, but that just shows that the tool is really designed for global context.
Thank you, Will. I will pick some questions, I guess more for Veronique. So one question is, what could be the role of the clusters in general and the food security cluster in specific? I guess the role on mainstreaming environment in our humanitarian interventions.
Yeah, well, if I'm not wrong, I think that the strategy of the food security cluster included this issue. So I think that it's a good place to exchange some practices, to discuss some difficulties, share ideas about how to do. Yeah, I think that could be a good place to facilitate exchanges for the food security cluster. And I don't know, yeah, I know that beyond the food security cluster, there is this HIA Connect, Emergency Humanitarian Action or Association Connect, trying to make bridges between the climate action actors with humanitarian actors. So this is a good place also to exchange experiences. And for the French speaker, I just wanted to inform that the Réseau Humanitaire, the Réseau Environnement Humanitaire, now the network on these issues is open for those who would like to join. You are most welcome. But yes, it is a French-speaking space. Yeah.
Thank you for that. There is a very specific question linked to distribution. So linked to your presentation on the focal point on distribution. Is there a risk that the environmental issues make the humanitarian world promote in-kind because of more control on environmental impact of distributed items rather than cash? And it would look like a step back.
It was not exactly what I meant, so maybe I was not clear enough. But I think that there is a potential, for example, to give some conditionality or make vouchers clearly linked to some kind of items. Maybe the studies we did and others did on these issues clearly demonstrate that if nothing is done, then cash can be a real impact on the environment, because maybe the beneficiaries will choose the cheapest things, which are not the best one. So this is the reality. So there is something to think about there. Yeah, it's not to say that we have to go back to in-kind distribution, but there are options between the two extremes, I think. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Veronique. Okay, I will pick the last question. Okay, sorry, there is a quick question that I just saw for Veronique. Can you please share the link for the network in French context? I guess you can share on the chat box.
Okay.
All right, thank you for this last question. So the last question I have picked, I guess that William, you could answer as being part of the GEU. On environment, what are the international platforms discussing about the impact of humanitarian assistance on environment?
Yeah, thank you. It's a little bit outside of my work stream, so I can't comment in depth, but we do have a few platforms at the JEU, notably the EE Center, the Environmental Emergency Center.org, and the EHA Connect, which has been referenced, I think, by Veronique. So these are some good starting points for guided learning resources from the JEU and from other partner organizations.
All right, thanks. I don't know, Veronique, if you want to add something to this question. You already mentioned the EHA, the question on international platform discussing about impact of humanitarian assistance on environment.
Yeah, this is the EHA and the Réseau Environnement Humanitaire, to my knowledge, and on the climate, on the issue of carbon footprint, you have a new initiative named the Climate Change Accelerator. So this is a complementary on this specific issue. But yeah, I think that the main for discussion, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know if someone did it. Maybe I'm adding on the chat box the link to EHA Connect. All right. I think that's all for this session. As I said, we are running a little bit late, so we will stop here. But for you to know, as I know that it can be a bit frustrating because you have a lot of questions and the time is limited to take all those questions and answer it. Don't worry, as I said, it will be answered in the final report, but also for those that are available tomorrow, we have the working group session where we will be talking about, so you can see the agenda on your screen. On this breakout rooms on each working group, we will be discussing among the different participants on how to mainstream climate and environment within our interventions, what could be the role of the food security cluster, and the same for anticipatory action. We will be discussing on the role of the cluster in supporting the partners to increase their and have more appropriate anticipatory actions. So don't worry, we will have time, and we will be in smaller groups. So we will have more time to exchange on all those topics that we are talking since yesterday. So I guess now we will have the time for a small break. And if you allow me, I will just give you a 5 minutes break. Sorry for that. So we can finish on time this second day of the meeting. And after the break, we'll be looking at SAG updates. So thank you very much. From now, I have it's 13 past 3 at my time. See you in 5 minutes from now.
Okay.
Okay. I think we have almost all the participants. We can start again. So I taking the time to wait for the rest of the participants. I really thank again a lot all of our speakers for the climate and environment sessions. They really provided us with a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much again. So now we will start with the Sag session. So the Strategic Advisory Group, which I am a member of. So I will be doing the presentation on the past and future works of the SAG. And just after this presentation, we will have the chance to welcome a new member of the SAG. As you know, the SAG members that represent the organizations, partners of the cluster, they have a 2 years mandate. So we, unfortunately, we will say goodbye to 2 members, and we will welcome new members. So we'll have the chance to have a speech with them after my presentation. Starting about the SAG updates. So please, can we have the next slide? All right. So just to remember you that the SAG, what is the global objective of the SAG first, is to provide the strategic guidance to the global food security cluster, and it's also has a role of facilitating the accountability to its partners. So if you want to have more information on the roles and responsibility of the SAG members, please go to the Food Security Cluster website. There is a specific page for the SAG. Maybe we can have it in the chat box, the link. And if you see in this slide, you have the composition of the SAG. So we have 4 NGOs represented. So 4 partners elected, as I said, with a 2 years mandate. We have Thomas Olholm from NRC, Paul Kinutia from World Vision International, which are the 2 outgoing members. We have Joanne Grace from Save the Children that you had the chance yesterday to see because she was sharing the first day. You have myself, Julie Mayans from Solidarity International. Then you have the two global cluster coordinators, of course. So we have Nawar Labidi, the Global Food Security Cluster Coordinator for WFP side, and we have Abdul Majid Khan for FAO. Then we have the two lead agencies that are represented, so FAO and WFP, Alberto Bigi for FAO, and WFP, Ilaria De Torre. And to finish, and an important part also is a representative of the cluster coordinator. And we have Fabien Talek, which is the Food Security Cluster Coordinator for Haiti, which is outgoing also. Thank you. Next slide, please. All right, so we will be looking briefly at the 2021 SAG main achievements, and especially those since the last meeting. So in terms of the membership, so as you know, the SAG is responsible of looking at the new membership applications and to decide if those applications are okay and that we will have new members, whether those members are full members, associate or observers. So currently we have 76 partners at the GFSC level. Then about transparency and partner involvement. So as you may know, we have on the SAG on the SAG page of the website, we always publish the minutes of all our meetings, and all the presentations that we do, they are published. Then, as I mentioned before, we have the TOR that is published online. We also have a dedicated mailbox, which you can see the email on the slide. And as mentioned also, we have this rotational membership that allow transparency. All right, thank you. For the next slide. Okay. So we have we try to have regular SAG meetings once a month or more if necessary. So as far as we have in 2021, we had 12 meetings, 15 meetings in 2020. Also because of the COVID situation, there was an increase in meetings, and in 2019 we had 9 meetings. The main topic discussed this year in the SAG meetings. So of course, we had the famine prevention advocacy initiatives, intersectorial collaboration. You might have seen the intersectorial cluster statement on famine that was published recently. We also have a big role in supporting the working groups. And global partners meetings priorities and contents. As this meeting, for example, we were of course involved in the preparation of this meeting and in selecting the main topics of interest for this meeting and the speakers. There is an important role also on the strategy of the global food security cluster. So for example, this year we had the midterm review of this strategy. So we contributed to the report of the midterm review strategy, and it was published in July 2021 and available in the website as always. Next slide, please. All right, so the technical working groups and partners engagements. So as I said, we are really engaged in supporting the working groups, because the working groups are really the space where the partners, can provide your recommendation and share your experiences related to different topics. So the SAG supports any work of the working groups. So it could be advocacy work, it could be products, reports, the meetings, etc. We also have a role of, whenever it's necessary, opening or closure of working group when necessary. We ensure that the working groups are aligned with the GFSC strategic plan, of course. And we also focus our efforts in ensuring that the working groups are aligned, harmonized, and interrelated. And we also try as much as possible to have inter-cluster working groups. So looking at the working groups of other clusters like WASH cluster or ELSE cluster and see what linkages can be done between their working groups and our working groups. Next slide, please. All right, way forward for 2022. So the election, we'll speak about that just after the end of this presentation. The technical working groups, we will continue all what I mentioned related to the working groups, so we'll not repeat it. Then the GFSC membership also will, of course, continue to review the new application and advocate for humanitarian organizations to join the cluster. Related to external presenters, we'll be proactive in involving stakeholders that can be supportive of the GFSC and partners. So we are always looking at new stakeholders that can be from the private sector, from the research sector, academia, etc., to support us in our work, or maybe also it could be a support to a specific working group. And we proactively engage in the preparation of new strategic plans and initiatives. All right, I think that was the last slide, if I am not wrong. No. Okay, so just this slide to remind you of the email of the SAG and why you can contact the SAG in between meetings. Of course, you can contact us, for example, to share any information or concerns related to humanitarian coordination in FSL. You can make ad hoc requests to the SAG members, or you can also request us for helping you with external presentations, for example, among others. So please do not hesitate. We are here to represent the partners, especially I'm talking about the NGO representatives. Okay, there is some noise. Okay, now it's muted. So this is the SAG presentation. We do not have so much time for questions and answers, but maybe you can if you have very burning question, you can ask in the chat, and we can answer you in the chat. Now I would like to take the opportunity of welcome the new member and also say goodbye to the outgoing members. So just for you to know, as I mentioned, we have two outgoing members, Thomas from NRC and Paul from World Vision International, and I will give them the floor just after that to introduce themselves. But first, I would like to welcome and congratulate Peter Muhengi from Plan International, which is the new member of the SAG. And we normally had another organization that applied for the second position of SAG member, but unfortunately, this organization has to withdraw yesterday its application. So we have one vacant position. So what will happen? We will send you as soon as possible an expression of interest for the organization that would like to take this position of SAG member. So this is just for the full members. I would like to insist on that. And you will receive this expression of interest. And if there are more than one organization interested in this position, we will organize election online, probably during December, before the end of this year. So now I would like to give the floor to Peter Muhengi, the new SAG member. So to introduce yourself, Peter, and also to tell us what are your motivations and expectation of being part of the SAG. If you can also switch on your video, that would be really great.
Thank you, Julie. And glad to meet you again. Dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm really glad to be here to join the Global Food Security Cluster, SAG. My name is Peter Muhangi. I'm Ugandan and working with Plan International as the Global Food Security Specialist since April this year. Plan has a large and growing food security portfolio, and I'm responsible for strategic leadership for that sector. Prior to joining Plan International, I worked with the IFRC Africa Regional Office for 6 years, based in Nairobi, and specifically responsible for East and Southern Africa, where I met several of you and worked very closely with you. And prior to that, I worked with Save the Children in Ethiopia for 3 years, leading a large food security livelihoods portfolio that also included early warning, resilience, and social protection. And before that, I worked in Southern Africa, based in Lesotho, worked with Save the Children, UNICEF, and WFP, supporting the Lesotho National Vulnerability Assessment Committee, but also for the last 2 years when I was at WFP, with the regional remit, supporting the Southern Africa Development Community Regional Vulnerability Assessment and Analysis Program. And before that, I worked with Oxfam and Save the Children in Uganda, including an attachment to the Office of the Prime Minister for 2 years. And in between, I've done consultancies with WFP in Namibia, with the FAO in Somalia, and also with the Regional Hunger and Vulnerability Program in Southern Africa, specifically in Botswana and in Namibia. So I bring with me 25 years experience in leadership of the food security and livelihood sector, in food security analysis, and in programming, as well as in capacity strengthening, mainly in Southern Africa, but I also had a short stint with Iraq, IFRC Iraq office for 3 months, and also since April, so when I joined Plan International, it's much more of a global portfolio. And since April, I've been a member of the Global Food Security Cluster, specifically with the working groups on livelihoods and agriculture, and the one on program quality. So I've been closely working with some of you, and I'm now really happy to be joining the group. I also bring experience working with government institutions in Namibia, Lesotho, Botswana, Uganda, and Eswatini, supporting disaster risk management, especially on food security analysis and vulnerability analysis as well, and response planning. I also have experience working with the Southern Africa Development Community, Regional Vulnerability Assessment and Analysis Program, and the National Vulnerability Assessment Committees for 2 years, and also in East Africa with the Intergovernmental Authority on Droughts and Development, and closely working with regional working groups and country clusters, networks, and task forces. So that's the experience I bring to this.
Sorry, Peter. Excuse me, Peter. I forgot
Yes.
to tell you that you had 3 minutes.
All
So
right.
we are almost done. Sorry for that.
All right. So I'll finish in a minute. Okay, so that's the kind of experience I bring to the SAG, and glad to have worked with several of you, including Julie at IFRC, Joe at Save the Children, Charles Hopkins in Ethiopia and in the Somali cluster, Nancy Koech, Somalia cluster, and and Tawana with IFRC in Southern Africa. I'm really glad to be here. I look forward to working with all of you, and I feel welcome to the SAG and to the Global Food Security Cluster. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome again. So sadly, as we are welcoming new members, it means that we are saying goodbye to outgoing members and two precious members. So please, can you, Thomas and Paul, say a word to us and speak about your experience of being part of the SAG in those last 2 years. So we can start with Thomas from NRC, maybe in 1 or 2 minutes. And Paul from World Vision will speak after Thomas.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you very much. I would also like to say thank you very much for the last 2 days. It's been very interesting to see how we have shaped the agenda. A warm welcome to Paul for the SAG. There is a lot of work lying ahead of you, but you seem to be ready for it, so happy about that. I also want to say thank you to all partners participating in the Global Partners meeting. This is critical for the cluster functioning, that there is a broad foundation of participation. I've been working or participating in global cluster meetings since 2013, and I've seen how the cluster has developed a lot since then. I'm very happy to see that the working groups, they get sharper in what they do. We have a SAG that is consolidating itself as a strategic advisory group into what the cluster does. And not least, these global partner meetings that we also have twice a year are very important for networking. And in the last 2 years, there has been some challenges. Like, I think it's the first time that we have not met at all for 2 full calendar years. And that's a period for where I have been on the SAG. That has not been easy, and yet we have managed to get through it together. What I have seen in these 2 years, however, is also that the pandemic has weakened our connectivity between us as partners. I have seen that we have managed to get smaller NGOs and NGOs only working in 1 or 2 countries coming in, but I don't hear their voices. I see we have many priorities in the cluster that might be too much. And I see how the global support team is also challenged with an increasing workload. That is also why I encourage, when we look ahead as partners, and especially also for the SAG, to really help sharpening what the cluster invests in and how it will develop. Ensure equal participation, irrespective if you're a small or big NGO, we all have an equal voice. And really reinforce and shape the connectivity to people in the field, so that it is not a head office dominance, but it's a balance between field and head office colleagues. I also want us all together as partners to see more collaborative spirit in terms of change the way of working. Like when we look into the future of how cluster coordination is working, the sector-based approach is maybe not the future. In earlier Global Partners meeting, we also had a session on this, how area-based approaches is taking more and more the agenda. So we see a change is coming. So we need to prepare the cluster and help our cluster colleagues in taking on that role, because it comes back to us as partners in the way we work together. We need to look more at what adds value to the cluster, and it's back to the priorities, like really focus on what we invest in. And some years back, partners helped by the global cluster work by seconding or funding positions. I would be happy to see that coming back, because it also increases our voice as civil society organizations in the cluster system. So I really hope that's something we can get back on the agenda. And then really look at how we connect between the technical working groups and the SAG is really important, like that it's not working in parallel, but working in union. So yeah, thank you very much. Has been 2 exciting years, and I hope there will be a lot of excitement looking ahead.
Thank you, Thomas, for these rich words. Paul?
Thank you, Julie. I will not repeat what Thomas has said. I think for me, it's been quite a good journey. And as Thomas said, the last 2 years, we haven't really had that interpersonal connection, and because we've been working virtually. But one of the things is, I think this is a high time that as partners, we really need to continue working together, because whatever we are looking at, unless we work together, we are not able to win this. Of course, to Peter, the new member, and for the other SAG member, the commitment is quite high. Of course, when we are taking it, you didn't think there is a lot of work to do, but just to say there is a lot of hours that you will need to be able to support the cluster and to be able to do that. Of course, there is still some areas of growth, and one of the areas, especially for the partners, is they need to have more dialogue with the SAG, and especially because SAG, we are representing the other partners at the cluster. So we need to hear more from them. Of course, there is a clear mechanism of us communicating that, but I think I didn't see much of that apart from through the working group, but I think we needed to talk more. Much of our work is through the working group, and I think that worked very well. I think I saw that coming out, especially during the start of the COVID. There was a lot of work that was done through the working group. So just to request us as partners to ensure at least you are in one of the working group, so that we are able to push the work of the cluster. I think also it is important for us to continue reviewing the working group when we realize there is a new working group that need to be put in place, so that we are able to continue the work that we are doing. Of course, the issue of how we bring the local partners, we have been discussing about the push on localization, but we need to see how do we bring them on the table, and especially at the country level, that still is missing. I remember we've been having a lot of discussion even to say, can we have some of the local partners also sitting on the SAG, so that it is not only the big organization sitting there, but we need to listen to them and see how can we be able to start bringing them on board. So that would be something very clear. And then, of course, the whole issue about relooking at our strategic plan. And I think when we were doing the midterm review, it came out very clear we need to realign to the changes in the context, so that it is not a stagnant document, but we keep looking at that, and we will be successful. But this is a high time. I think we need to continue working more closely, and also identifying how are we able to link with other clusters. That hasn't worked very well for us. I think it is a complex issue where we see our global food security cluster. How do we work with the other clusters? I think during the pandemic, we tried to push that, but it is a complex issue that we need to continue pushing for. Otherwise, I wish the new member and the new SAG a good time. We are still there, and we will continue supporting the work of the cluster, because we believe working within the cluster is going to help us push the food security agenda. Back to you, Julie.
Thank you very much, Thomas and Paul, and really thank you so much for your high engagement within the SAG. We will miss you, but we are happy to know that you're still with us. Before we have the closing remarks, please have a look on the chat box. We have the link to the evaluation of those 2 days of meeting with 3 short slides. So it might take not more than a couple of minutes to answer it. And it's really important for us to improve every time those meetings. All right, so I would like to welcome our last speakers, but not the least, our 2 global cluster coordinators that will give the closing remarks. So we have Nawar Lavidi from WFP and Abdul Majid Kad from FAO. And as I assume, Abdul Majid, you're a gentleman, we can start giving the floor to Nawar.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Thank you for the excellent facilitation today. And thank you all, dear colleagues, dear partners, for your engagement, for the very rich discussion that we had these 2 days. I think we have a lot of food for thought, a lot of things to continue building on. And also, I think we realize all the challenges and the complexity of the work that we have ahead of us. I mean, I will not repeat. I think it has been. It's just like we want to close something and really reiterate the fact that we unfortunately continue to face a dire situation, that the needs are increasing, that we see this driver that we have been mentioning not going rightly in the right direction. I mean, we see the increase in the conflict, we see the increase also on the climate-related shocks, and unfortunately, from the COVID and from the pandemic side, we don't even see yet the end of the tunnel, and we are also concerned about also the implications and everything on the economic side. So that, on one hand, is a huge task among all of us, and it's another time. I think it's important to I mean, everyone has mentioned it, that we collaboratively work together, that I think that we build on, I mean, complement each other, try hard to address, on one hand, the immediate needs, but also look at the sustainable solutions, rather than, I mean, looking, I mean, I think, and then bringing all the actors together. So I think we are also faced with some challenges that we need also, I think, to think on actions that are at scale, that will show impact, that are cost effective, cost efficient, because of all the challenges that we see. So that's a little bit, I mean, for my reaction on these 2 days. I would like also, of course, to say a few words to first welcome Peter as new SAG members, and very pleased to have you on board, Peter. We are looking forward to it, and I think you are bringing a lot of experience, a lot of also, I think, interesting work journey that it will be also useful to have you on board. And Thomas and Paul, really thank you for your, for all the work, for all the enthusiasm, for all the discussion that we had over the last few months. You will be missed, and but I hope that we will remain in touch. The door actually of will remain open for you to reach out anytime, and I believe we will reach out as well to you as you are part of the family. For the partners, I mean, it has been mentioned, but please, I mean, we mentioned it last time as well, but please, I mean, let's not keep our discussion only on this global partner meeting, but I think feel free to reach out to us also for any important issues, for anything that is also at field level that would require some a discussion or something. I mean, you can reach out to us through the SAG, and we have shared, I think, the email. You can also contact Abdul Majid or myself or the food security or the global support team. I mean, we have different avenues to reach out to us, and I think I think we will be able to achieve better and more with the participation of everyone. So again, thank you all very much. And we still, maybe just a reminder that we still have also discussions with another important aspect of the work, which is the working groups, and we have dedicated session tomorrow. So for those of you who still are available and interested, we're really looking forward to having you also participate in this discussion tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nawa. Abdul Majid, please, the floor is yours for the last word.
Yes, I hope people still have patience to listen to someone for a few minutes. First of all, thank you very much, Jolie, from Solidarity International, for all your support in terms of strategic advisory group, but also for this support and organizing this Global Food Security Cluster Partners meeting in a very professional way. Thanks to Joanna Grace yesterday for chairing the meeting, and also a lot of support for our work on food security cluster. I also would like to thank to the team in Ethiopia, the team in Afghanistan, the team in South Sudan, and the team in Madagascar who took some time to prepare presentation for this larger group to show some issues that we are facing in food security sector, and also sharing their best practices and results. So thank you to those. There were a lot of other very timely and effective presentations based on the context. Those were from IPC team, the team in NEAT, early warning, early action team, climate change team. So thank you all very much for taking your time to support the cluster and providing this these presentations with very relevant information that our partners and cluster coordinators at country level can get maximum benefit of. And as Thomas said, this will also help us to establish linkages. That's really important. So I think, and that's one of the objective of this forum, that we provide opportunities to the people to work together, to link with each other, and you know, increase the collaboration among our work to maximize the impact. So thank you very much for all for this support. Thomas, Paul, I haven't worked with you a lot, but during the last 1 month, I have seen your commitment and the support that you have provided. It's really remarkable, you know, on top of your role in your organization, which is quite heavy role, you provided very timely support to us. So thanks for that. On my list, the final thanks goes to all the cluster people and NGO colleagues who have participated in this meeting, especially Davide and our team who, you know, worked almost last 1.5 months to organize this meeting. So thank you very much to the team. Some of the very important things that I was taking note on that we will really consider in our plans for 2022. Those work, you know, working together with other clusters. That's really important, because if you want to show some impact at the grassroots level for our affected communities, you really work together to achieve collective outcomes. So that's very important. The point on, there were various discussions where some feedback was provided that what clusters can do or what is expected from the cluster. So that is very well noted. I was looking at the presentations, I was looking at the feedback and questions posted in the meeting. So those are very well taken, and I think our team will be working on it to include all these things in the report. And then in the next meeting, we can tell you that all those advices and recommendation that were provided to us, what we have done on that, so that we can also increase accountability within our cluster. There was also some discussions about the working groups that will happen. As Naur mentioned, tomorrow we will be having a session on working groups, so please participate in it and try to see that we are still relevant or not, and what need to be done in 2022 to provide you more effective support that can help you to perform your job at the field level. So that will be really important. So I recommend all of you to please dedicate one more half day tomorrow to participate in those working groups. I think that's all. We all know that we have a big challenge in front of us in 2022. We have time to reflect on what we have achieved in 2021. And I think in the next meeting, we would be able to see, once the data will start coming from all the partners in the beginning of 2022 on the achievements of the year, we will be able to reflect in a better way that what we were able to achieve as a team. And then, we take on those learnings to 2022 and then try to see that how we can be more relevant, effective in 2022 and providing the response at grassroots level with our partners, with other clusters in a collective manner. So with that, thank you very much all for your participation. And I'm really looking forward to, the outcomes of this meeting, and then, looking forward to discuss with you and meet with you in the coming years to improve our collaboration at the global, regional, and country level. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all the speakers and thank you to all the participants. See you tomorrow, hopefully, for the working group session. And have a good end of day. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, thanks.